Okay, so I want to start today with a caveat. And I am giving you this caveat right at the top before anything else, because I think you deserve it, and because I genuinely believe that being honest about what is confirmed and what is whisper actually makes the story more interesting rather than less. If everything I said was confirmed fact, it would be a news report. The reason it is worth analyzing is precisely that it sits in that uncomfortable space between pattern and proof. What I am about to tell you is unconfirmed. Nothing about this has been nailed down on the record by any named source. This is the kind of story that circulates through royal watcher circles as a whisper, something that people close to the situation are describing in private conversations, but that nobody is willing to attach their name to publicly.
It's the same thing he did with King Charles a couple months ago when he let it be known through a source, wink, friend, wink, that he would be happy to accept an invitation to Sandringham, but of course, he would only go if his wife and kids were there, and that.
Oh yeah, and if there's full
he
security
knew,
paid for by people like me.
and if he knew who else was going to be.
I am telling you that up front, not to hedge my way out of anything, but because I think context matters and because there is actually a more interesting story inside the speculation than there is in the headline figure alone. With all of that said, and I mean it when I say the caveat makes it more interesting, not less. Here we go. What is being described by insiders who follow this family closely is a request. A financial request, framed in the language of charity, that apparently came from Harry's direction toward his father. And the figure being attached to this request, and again, I am flagging this as unconfirmed, is $10 million. $10 million, framed as a charitable contribution to causes close to Harry's interests. Not a small ask in any context, but particularly striking in this one, because if the whispers are accurate, it was not framed as Harry saying I have $10 million and I want to give it to this cause. It was framed as something larger, something that would require Charles to be involved in making it happen. And the reaction attributed to King Charles by the people describing this, not anger, apparently. Not a long speech about broken trust and everything that has happened over the last 5 years. Not even, by the accounts circulating, any immediate attempt to say something definitive.
Harry's wish list, like, oh God, maybe Catherine can get through to my brother. Catherine, can you do this? And doing it through sources, friends, whatnot. I call baloney on it. It's just really Harry stamping his feet and playing wish list again. It's absolutely obnoxious.
One word keeps coming up when people describe how Charles reportedly received this: speechless. Now I need you to sit with that word for a second, because I think it is actually the most interesting thing in this whole story. Speechless. This is a man who has been trained since childhood to have an appropriate, measured, composed response to almost anything. A man who has navigated public scandal, family tragedy, Diana, the divorce, the whole Andrew situation, decades of intense public scrutiny, with a practiced calm that is genuinely remarkable when you think about what he has had to keep his face neutral through.
You put things through corporations and charities, you save on tax. So, and Meghan's very sophisticated. If ever she decided that she wanted to cease being a scrubber, she could become a laundress.
Getting this man to the point of having no words ready is not a small thing. That takes something. So today we are going to do 3 things. We are going to look at why a story like this, even if the precise number turns out to be wrong, fits almost too neatly into everything we already know about this relationship. We are going to look at the financial picture around Harry right now. And some of this is actually documented, not just speculation.
Money is running out. There is no clear plan, a total divergence in terms of what they want.
And we are going to ask the question that I think deserves asking. Does Harry understand how these approaches actually land? And if he does, why does the pattern keep repeating? Stay with me, because there is a lot here and it goes deeper than the headline figure. Let's start with the pattern, because this is what gives the story its traction. The reason it spread quickly, and the reason so many people who follow this family found it instantly plausible rather than outrageous. If you have been watching the relationship between Harry and his father for the last few years, one thing stands out above almost everything else. Every approach, every overture, every supposedly heartfelt attempt at reconciliation has come with conditions attached. Every single one. I genuinely could not tell you a single example of Harry reaching out to his father in a simple, uncomplicated, nothing in return kind of way. And I have been covering this family for a long time now.
Harry is the worst of the worst because, along with his wife, they are opportunists. They are there to make themselves appear as if they are these high and mighty good leaders out to do the great things for the people. But behind the scenes of all of that, they are self-serving, they are being egotistical, wanting to paint a narrative that they are doing something that is completely false to the reality.
Every time a story surfaces about a potential visit, a possible meeting, some whisper of a rapprochement, there is always a list that goes with it. He would be delighted to attend, but Meghan and the children would need to come too. He would love to spend time with his father, but security would need to be arranged and paid for. He is open to a meeting, but he would need to know in advance exactly who else would be in the room. He is interested in reconciliation, but there is this other thing that needs to be resolved first. I am not making these up. These conditions have been reported repeatedly by multiple outlets across multiple years. And what they describe, when you lay them all out in sequence, is not a son reaching out to his father. What they describe is a negotiation. A long-running, carefully managed negotiation in which every gesture toward warmth turns out to be the opening position in a transaction. Now, add a $10 million charitable ask to that pattern and you start to understand why the people who know this relationship found it so instantly believable. It fits the playbook exactly. Grand gesture on the outside, generous in its framing, generous in its scale, genuinely charitable in its stated purpose. And inside it, quietly, a request for something Harry could not simply ask for directly. Whether that something is money or access, or the publicly visible moment of a father and son coming together on a shared cause that Harry could then use to rebuild a reputation that has taken considerable damage, is almost beside the point.
My understanding is that the king is absolutely resolute that it's nothing to do with him. He's not going to interfere. He's never interfered. He's left it up to Ravik. And let's remember, most of the members of Ravik are members of the government.
The shape of the approach is the thing that people who know this relationship recognize the moment they heard it. And here is the thing about that recognition. It is not cynicism for its own sake. It is pattern recognition developed over years of watching the same dynamic play out with different numbers and different framings. Every person in the palace who has been doing this for any length of time carries that institutional memory. They know what it looks like when it arrives. They have seen it before, dressed slightly differently each time, carrying the same underlying structure. Something is wanted. Something is offered in exchange. The gesture appears generous. The ask underneath it appears once the door has been opened. A genuine reconciliation between a father and a son does not look like this. It does not open with a $10 million figure. It opens with a phone call, or a letter, or a knock on a door. Something small, something human, something that does not require the other person to weigh its financial implications before deciding how to respond. A genuine reconciliation, the kind Harry talks about publicly, the children knowing their grandfather, healing what was broken, does not typically require a $10 million opening bid. That is not how families repair themselves. That is how business partnerships get structured. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture on this one, the pattern, the money, the question nobody is asking, the like button costs nothing and it keeps this channel going. Let me talk about the money now, because the money is where the story gets genuinely interesting, and it is where speculation starts to connect to documented reality rather than just vibes and whispers. Harry's financial situation is, by multiple credible accounts, considerably more fragile than the Montecito lifestyle would suggest. And I want to be specific about that, because some of this is not speculation. Some of this is actually in the public record. The Netflix deal is over or has been restructured so dramatically that it might as well be over in any commercially meaningful sense. Spotify is gone, and the exit was accompanied by language from the departing executive that was so blunt it generated its own extraordinary round of coverage. The speaking circuit fees have reportedly fallen significantly from their peak. Multiple outlets have reported this, drawing on industry sources who know what these things are worth. The Archewell Foundation had a documented 7-figure deficit in its most recent public filings. The As Ever brand launched with strong initial interest and has since watched its US web traffic fall by close to half within months. And then there are the legal costs, which are genuinely staggering when you lay them out. Court documents from Harry's phone hacking case revealed approved legal budgets that were enormous. His earlier settlement with a British newspaper publisher was widely reported to have exceeded £10 million on its own. Those are not investments. Those are costs. Significant, ongoing, difficult to recover from costs. Harry reportedly inherited around £10 million from Diana's estate when he turned 30, and reporting suggests a further substantial sum from a Queen Mother trust around his 40th birthday. Those are real sums. In most people's lives, those would represent lasting financial security, but they are finite. And between the legal expenses, the security costs that are no longer covered by the British government, the mortgage on a Montecito property, the staffing costs of running a household and professional operation at that level, and the fact that the major income sources have either ended or contracted, the actual picture in 2026 is genuinely uncertain. I want to be clear that I do not know the exact state of Harry's finances. Nobody outside his own accountants does. What I can say is that the pattern of contracting commercial relationships and documented expenditures is real, is supported by multiple independent sources, and is the kind of backdrop against which a $10 million charitable pledge toward a father who still has significant resources starts to make a certain uncomfortable kind of sense. The acrimonious departure from Sentabale, the charity Harry founded in his mother's memory, which he then left under circumstances that required legal proceedings to fully resolve, added another layer to all of this that I do not think has been fully appreciated publicly. It is very difficult to present yourself credibly as someone pursuing genuine charitable impact when you have just publicly and legally departed from your own flagship charity. That closure matters, and it matters in the specific context of a $10 million charitable pledge being reportedly floated toward the family you left. Because here is the question worth sitting with. If Harry has the $10 million ready to give, sitting in his own account, liquid available, then why is it being framed as something that needs to be raised? Why is the king involved at all? A straightforward charitable donation from a man with $10 million spare does not typically require a conversation with your father about it. It requires a conversation with your financial advisor. The involvement of the king in the framing of this story, and again, I am relaying whispers, not confirmed facts, suggests this is not simply a donation being announced. Straightforward charitable donations do not typically require a conversation with your father. They require a conversation with your financial advisor. The involvement of Charles suggests this is a request that, dressed in the language of charitable giving, is ultimately asking for something that only Charles can provide. And the king, reportedly, went quiet. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and drop your take in the comments. Does this pattern feel familiar to you? And do you think the whispers are being read too harshly? Or does the 10 million framing actually fit everything you have been watching for the last few years? Let me ask the question I promised to ask. Does Harry actually understand how this lands? Because here is the thing that I keep coming back to. If you look at this situation from the outside with genuinely fresh eyes, not sympathetic eyes, not hostile eyes, just fresh ones, what you see is a son who left loudly, who turned the leaving into multiple commercial products, who has publicly attributed the breakdown of his family relationships to racism and cruelty and institutional failure, and who then periodically resurfaces with a grand gesture framed as a step toward healing that happens to involve a very large number and, frequently, some kind of external benefit. I genuinely think Harry cares about the causes he associates himself with. I do not think he is a hollow person performing generosity for the cameras. But there is a difference between caring about something and understanding how your expression of that caring lands in a specific, historically loaded context with a specific person who has a complete institutional memory of every previous request you have ever made. The people in that palace know the pattern. The advisors have files. The king himself has had years of these conversations in one form or another. And when the next approach arrives, however it is framed, however genuinely the stated purpose is meant, it lands in the context of every approach that came before it. It lands in the context of Spare. It lands in the context of the Oprah interview. It lands in the context of every time a warm-sounding overture turned out to have something attached to it. I keep thinking about this theory that people who follow this family closely have quietly been developing, and I find it genuinely sad rather than satisfying to describe. The theory is that Harry has come to believe, or has been helped to come to believe, that grand enough gestures can substitute for the slower, harder, less photogenic work of actually rebuilding trust. That the scale of the gesture is what matters. That if the number is large enough, the cause noble enough, the framing generous enough, and the public visibility of the moment significant enough, it should be sufficient. It should be enough to move things forward. It should unlock the access or the closeness or the public narrative shift that the gesture is ultimately in service of. And the reason that theory is sad rather than satisfying is because, if it is true, it suggests Harry has been operating for years with a fundamentally broken model of how forgiveness and reconciliation actually work between human beings, not between institutions, between a father and a son. But it is not. Not with this. Not at this level of damage. You do not repair 5 years of public revelations, private details shared in best-selling books, Oprah interviews, and Netflix documentaries with a charitable donation, however large. You repair them by showing up, consistently, over time, without conditions, without an adjacent ask, without a list of requirements that need to be met before the showing up can happen. That is how trust gets rebuilt. And that is the work. The quiet, uncelebrated, uncaptured work that, as far as anyone watching from the outside can see, has not yet begun. There are no documented examples of Harry simply showing up for his father, without a camera nearby, without conditions attached, without a list of what needs to be in place first, without something else that needs to be resolved before the showing up can happen. Just showing up, the way a son shows up for a father who is not well and who does not have unlimited time. That simple, uncelebrated, unmediated version of connection is what seems to be missing, and it cannot be replaced by the size of a charitable pledge, however genuinely the cause is meant. There is something genuinely sad buried in this story, and I want to name it because I think it matters. King Charles, by every account from people who know him, is not a man who wants to be estranged from his son. This is not a father who is holding grudges and counting points and waiting for Harry to grovel. This is a man in his late 70s, managing a serious illness, whose deepest private wish is to know his grandchildren and to have uncomplicated conversations with both of his sons before his time runs out. That is the father this request was apparently directed at. And what he reportedly received, instead of a son reaching out simply and without a price tag, was something that felt, to the people who heard about it and who know this dynamic, more like another position in the same negotiation than like a genuine step toward connection. And even for someone as practiced at composure as Charles, after all the training, all the preparation, all the decades of royal life that have taught him how to receive even terrible news without showing it, that was apparently enough to produce silence. Not the silence of someone composing a careful response, the silence of someone who has run out of words. Here is where I land on this story, and I want to be honest about the limits of what I'm saying, because I think honesty about uncertainty is more useful to you than false confidence about unconfirmed information. I cannot tell you whether the $10 million figure is accurate. I cannot tell you whether the request happened exactly as described, whether the framing was as transactional as it sounds in the whisper version, or whether Charles's reaction was as definitively speechless as the word implies. These are unconfirmed whispers, and I have told you that from the start. I cannot tell you whether this request happened exactly as described, or whether the framing was precisely as transactional as it sounds in the whisper version. What I can tell you is that the shape of the story is instantly recognizable to anyone who has been following this family for the last few years. You could remove the specific number, you could change the charitable cause, you could alter the timing, and it would still feel like a story about Harry and Charles in 2026. That recognizability, that instant plausibility, the fact that this version of events requires no suspension of disbelief, no leap, no charitable reading to accept as possible, is the real story. The story is not the $10 million. The story is that nobody who has been paying attention found the $10 million surprising. Those are the honest limits of what we know. The pattern, though, the pattern is documented. The pattern of conditional approaches, of grand gestures with asks inside them, of reconciliation that keeps arriving wrapped in negotiation. That pattern is years of reporting across multiple outlets and multiple journalists who do not know each other. And it is the pattern, more than any single figure, that makes the whisper feel like something. When a report this dramatic, this potentially damaging lands without shock among the people who follow this family most closely, that tells you something. Not necessarily about whether this specific incident happened, but about how deep the erosion of trust has gone, how thoroughly the pattern of transactional reconciliation has colonized how Harry's approaches are now received, and how close King Charles may finally be to a different kind of quiet in his responses to his younger son. Not the quiet of a patient father still hoping, still leaving a door open, still telling himself one more attempt might be the one that breaks through. The quiet of a man who has genuinely, finally, run out of words for this particular kind of request from this particular person. And honestly, after everything that has led to this point, after every previous request, every previous condition, every public revelation that landed in the palace like a grenade with Harry's name on it, can you really blame him? I want to end with this, because I think it deserves saying before the outro. Whatever you think of King Charles, and he is a complicated person who has made plenty of his own mistakes, I genuinely believe he does not want this distance. I believe he would give up quite a lot to have an ordinary afternoon with his son and his grandchildren without any conditions, any cameras, any negotiations beforehand. And I think Harry probably wants some version of the same thing. The tragedy, if there is one, is that they seem to have got so thoroughly lost in the transactional machinery of how they communicate with each other that the simple thing, the uncomplicated, quiet, no-agenda thing, has become almost impossible to imagine. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere underneath all of the transactions and the conditions and the carefully staged approaches, Harry knows this too. Maybe the $10 million figure, if it exists, is not cynicism. Maybe it is a man who genuinely wants to reconnect and has run so far into transactional thinking that he cannot find his way back to the simpler version. That would be its own kind of tragedy. A son who wants his father and cannot figure out how to want him without it becoming a deal. Does the $10 million figure feel true to you? Not necessarily accurate to the penny, because we simply do not know, but true in its shape, true to the pattern, true to what 5 years of watching this relationship has prepared you to expect. And the bigger question, do you think Harry genuinely cannot see how these approaches land with his father? Or do you think he sees it and does it anyway because the alternative, showing up with nothing to offer, just himself, with no conditions and no asks, feels too vulnerable? Because that version is actually the saddest one of all. Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. The like button keeps this channel going. See you in the next one. And when more of this story eventually gets confirmed or corrected, we will be here for that too.